Each episode, we bring you B2B leaders to learn about their successes, fails, and what's working for them in the market. If you enjoy the show, please consider giving us a 5-star rating on Apple and Spotify and share this podcast with a friend. That's enough from me. Let's dive right in.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode. I'm Shahin with X Growth, and today I'm talking to Tim Beveridge, founder and CEO of Modern Marketing Group and CMO of Versent, about whether you should go and explore an opportunity in the agency land or think about going on the client side and working on that front. I think this is a pretty topical conversation considering how a lot of shifts are happening in the workspace and employment space. A lot of people are moving around. The Great Resignation is upon us. Some say it's probably towards the end of it, but we'll see how that turns out. But we're going to be talking about agency versus client side and what you need to take into consideration. What are some of the benefits? What are some of the pros and cons? And dive deep into that. So on that note, Tim, thanks for joining us.
Hi, great to be here.
Absolute pleasure. So this is the second time we're on a kind of podcast / webinar. So it's great to have you back, Tim.
That was about 2 years ago.
That was pre-COVID. That was a different world back then.
I don't think it was quite. I think it was just as COVID hit, and I'm still in the same room.
You haven't moved, eh?
I haven't left.
I love it. So you have spent time on both sides. You've spent time on the agency side. You've spent time on the client side. I wanna get into the crux of it and talk about, at a high level, what are some of the differences between the two?
Yeah, I have spent time on client side and agency side. I actually started my career client side, moved agency side, and spent 25 years on the agency side in different kind of roles through media and digital and creative agencies, and then in the sort of software space, in sort of big enterprise tech and sort of marketing strategy there. At a high level, I think in a way, I think it's a false dichotomy. Is client side, people think client side is very, very different from agency side, and each side looks at each other as if they're slackers and don't know what they're doing. But the truth is that everyone's working very hard on both sides, and everyone's kind of bringing their full energies to the table every day. It's just that sometimes the kind of tensions at play on those on the other side from where you are. A little bit hard to see. I think the two things that are really different is the pace is really different. I think agency side is, in my experience anyway, full on all the time, but with but in short bursts. So you're full on one project, then you're full on another project, and you're full on another project or a pitch or whatever. Client side is full on all the time, but it's more relentless. The kind of the projects and the initiatives are more ongoing. Doesn't have a sort of a fixed input and fixed output, or a fixed start time and fixed end time. It tends to be a little bit more ongoing, and because you're thinking strategically about the growth of the brand and the marketing initiatives over time, you're seeing a much longer horizon in front of you. Often in agency land, you're seeing an 8-week or 3-month horizon with a client, and then it's sort of over and done. And so both full on, but just a little bit more relentless and kind of a lot more continuity on client side than agency side. And the other thing I'd say is the real difference is just a sense of professional community. In agency, everyone around you knows at least 50% of what you do. And if you're junior in that, there's people that can help you kind of grow and improve in how you deliver your work. If you're senior, then you've, probably got people that you can use as a sounding board and can kind of help you grow in that way. But client side, it can be a huge vacuum of professional community, actually. It sort of makes sense that, on the surface of it, of course, you're paid to do a job, and client-side organizations tend not to pay 2 people to do a job. Sometimes they do when they've got large offerings, but as you get more senior, there are fewer and fewer people, and certainly when you get to CMO, there's only one CMO. And so it's a massive vacuum, and it can get very lonely. And outside of, marketing, the marketing team, no one cares about marketing. No one cares about marketing. No one has the depth of, experience in marketing that the marketing team have. No one understands the implications of the nuanced conversations. And so it can get quite lonely, and it can get, very difficult. I suppose as marketers, we all see success in a certain way. And if we're talking, I don't know, if we're talking brand equity or we're talking customer experience or whatever we're talking about, we understand innately the kind of importance of those things. But when you get outside the marketing group and into other parts of the organization, generally the other parts of the organization don't care at all, about that stuff. So if you're talking about your amazing execution and how it's building brand equity, they don't really care. That's not a sign of success to them. And so I have heard this prior to kind of, moving back to client side that it's kind of a bit lonely. But I don't think I really understood it at the depth that I understand it now, in that if I'm trying to show my team, and my kind of input as being effective and kind of commercially impactful and those kinds of things, I can't rely on any latent knowledge of anything theoretical or strategic or anything. I have to just fight the fight that's in front of me. And so what's interesting about that is that I can think I've done an amazing job and I can actually have numbers to prove that. But then people won't necessarily agree that the numbers say what I think they say. So I can say, in this role, I got, a gazillion leads. And I'll say, but they weren't really leads. And I can say, well, no, but you said that they were leads when we had the first conversation, and now you say, so it's, my sort of signs of, doing effective work, even right down, to very commercial, very numbers focused analyses can mean something totally different depending on the conversation I'm having and whom I'm having them with. So those two things really, pace and sense of professional community are the core differences.
And I think the horizon, you also talked about the horizon of like how far you're looking at in the agency world. What are some of the, we touched on some of the client side stuff. What are some of the cons of the agency? And then after that, I want to come talk about the benefits. But what are some of the disadvantages of the agency world?
Okay, so preface this by it depends on the agency you're part of. There's lots
Yes.
of different agencies that do lots of different things. There's some agencies who have amazing leaders. There are other agencies who have actually pretty terrible leaders. Obviously not going to name names. I think one of the key things I would see in my former colleagues across different agency types working at different sort of practices. I talk about practice, so media is a practice, digital is a practice, creative agency is a practice, PR is a practice. Different practices, I suppose what I've seen is that people operating within a practice often discount the value of other practices. And that's either because they see the competitive pie as fixed, and so they see other agencies at the table with the client as stealing their money, effectively. So they're trying to discount the capability or the impact of other practices that are also around the table in order to grab more kind of share of a fixed budget. Or they're just naive, or they've only worked in that practice and they've got no understanding of any of the other practices. And so, it's their opinion and they're nice people, but they're naive about the impact of those other practices. What I think, after, 25 years of cross-training across different practices, is that all those practices are important. And it's important that all of those practices are brought to the table in the right way at the right time and given sort of freedom to operate. And so I suppose what the cons about working in an agency, and particularly in one agency and one practice, is that you can just get too deep and too siloed in your thinking about what marketing is and the value that you deliver to your client relative to other things. And so from a career standpoint, or for career planning perspective, I would suggest that you should be thinking about how you can cross-train, how you can build a body of knowledge, build a capability, and build a fluency with other practices. Because what it'll mean is you become a double adapter. Even if you're working in one practice for the rest of your career, you will still be able to collaborate with different practices more effectively, more constructively, and you'll be able to positively contribute. And positive contribution just means that your client's brand grows. It means your team grows. It means that the work you do is better. I think a lot of agencies, because of that short, they're looking at this month's numbers and next month's numbers. They're not thinking about a longer term thing. Often they cut off opportunity that they could have really fostered by not understanding the kind of benefit or the value of other practices or how those other practices work. So the cons of agency is that kind of narrow kind of worldview. I'd say also, and so if you're working in an agency environment, you need to be aware of your age relative to everyone else's age. Because like it or not, agencies tend to be younger. I remember standing at an all hands when I was at DDB, and the CEO or the MD at the time got up and said proudly, "Our average age is 27." And I was 28, and I was like, "Oh Jesus, I'm already over the hill." So if you want to have a long career, you put yourself. I think you put your best foot forward if you can kind of cross train. That's one piece of advice I'd give. There's that DDB story about average age being 27. I'm not sure what it is now, but it was 27 back then. I've also never been to a retirement party.
Oh wow! And in the agency world,
in 25 years, I've never been to a retirement party.
Oh, that's great. Well, why do you think that is? Do you think because like most people kind of exit the agency world when they get older? Do you think what are your thoughts? The reason for that is
I think early on in your career, your salary increases quite quickly, but then I think it then reaches a plateau for a lot of people. And yeah, some people hang around and are able to have the right conversations and do the right things to put themselves in a senior leadership position and stick around for a long time. But you look at the number of people that start that journey and the number of people that finish that journey, and it's obvious that there's a lot of attrition on the way between those 2 points. I see a lot of people that I've worked with go client side and do really well at that and stick around a lot longer. I've seen a lot of people I've worked with try and start their own agencies with, some have been very, very successful. Others sort of haven't been. I see, when I look around the market, I see this kind of late career malaise that happens, that people aren't working for other people anymore because they're sick of the bullshit. They're too expensive really to hire anyway, but they've got to sort of, fight the fight, as independent consultants, and that's really hard, unfortunately. And some of these people are incredibly talented, incredibly smart, very charming, all that good stuff, like great experience. But it just gets to a point where the people buying the service and the people, aren't buying, people like that, or aren't, I suppose, putting value on some of that depth of experience. So I think that's the con. The other thing is that agencies, as I've been part of them, have often been have often had very high service cultures, which means they say yes to everything. Very high service cultures, but very poor kind of discipline in regards to kind of project management and, resource planning and those kinds of other things. So what ends up happening is that you've got a kind of unhealthy relationship with work kind of instilled by the culture, and so that would be, a significant con, I think. Although, I work very hard and I've always worked very hard, so it's not really about that. It's about whether you have an opportunity to take a mental health break or have control over that relentlessness or not. Or is someone else committing your time ahead of time to doing a lot of things? And if you don't do that stuff, you're going to get fired. Even in an environment where you can easily go out and get another job, that's still a threat to be taken seriously, and it's still an impact on your sort of mental well-being.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's very true. And I think, it's hard in agency world. I mean, we try to do a lot of work on in terms of like capacity planning and what the model is on the agency side, but it is definitely taken us some time to get here, and we're not perfect. So I can totally see what you mean on that front.
Yeah, look, there's definite incentives for agency leaders to juniorize, because they can take a young, enthusiastic person, they can give them a job title promotion, pay them the same, charge them out at a higher rate, and just push them harder. Because when you give kind of a junior person a head of department kind of role or a second in charge kind of role or whatever, they're going to work bloody hard to keep that, but they're going to be drowning, which has happened to me in the past as well. And so I think there's an onus on, I think, both sides of the financial exchange there between the client and the agency. There's an onus on the agency to, accurately represent, I suppose, the workload that their team's doing, the skills and capabilities of the team, and, accurately represent that to the client. But there's also, responsibility on the client side to look at what you're asking of people and to try and understand whether they're the right people for the job. And you might say, well, it's up to the agency leader and it's up to the senior client leader to make sure those things work. But if one's demanding too much and not caring, if one's demanding too much of people or the client's demanding too much of the agency without caring about all of that sort of stuff, then all it means is that the pressure's just applied to the people within the agency who may not have the skills, may not have the kind of gravitas of being around a bit longer to negotiate their way through it.
Yeah. Or
and they suffer.
And I feel like this comes down to lack of kind of resource planning that you mentioned earlier. Because that's not there, there's also hard to argue. Hey, can you do another 10 hours this week? I don't know. Yeah, we'll figure it out. Just put it in. Yeah. And that kind of goes hand in hand in my experience, showing the client where you create a proper timeline and Gantt charts and resource planning, and you show it, and you're like, well, it's not what you're asking is not really possible. With this timeline is not going to happen. You're cutting down on a bunch of feedback sessions and bunch of this and bunch of that, and I think that, but also the agency needs to bring that maturity to the table. And if they don't do that, if they don't, then they get pushed around.
Yeah, I think I've seen the best work come out of agencies when there's been a long-term commitment to the agency by the client, and where they've been able to set the foundations and the ways of working and the mutual understanding of how each other operates, early on in that relationship. And there's been enough supply of work through that relationship to keep, a kind of core group of people on the agency side busy, and, deliveries coming through into the client side so that the CMO can justify the spend. I think when it's kind of, and Versent has struggled with this in the last year when the briefs are too few and far between and the budget's too low and there's no continuity. It's very, very hard to get work out of an agency.
Yeah.
That's, that's sort of meeting the kind of standard that you want.
What about some of the benefits? Let's turn the table and talk about what are some of the benefits of someone who's in the job market looking at an agency role versus a client role, going on client side. What are some of the benefits have you seen working on the agency side? We've talked about a few of these. The community piece is definitely there. But what are some of the other things that you see are kind of the benefits of being in the agency world?
Yeah, so the first benefit is deep growth in a discipline, and deep kind of, when you're starting your career, speaking, from my own perspective, starting my career, I had no understanding of project management. I had no understanding of what it's like to turn up to work at 9 a.m. every day and leave at 5 every day. I once got told off wearing shorts in the office, which probably wouldn't happen now, but, like dress, all that sort of stuff, all that kind of becoming an adult, you don't know, right? So you've got to learn all of that, and you'll learn that whether you're in client side or you're in agency side. You'll probably learn it in a different way, but you'll learn all of that. The next thing above that you need to learn as a practitioner is a discipline, and I think a foundational discipline that becomes a reference point for the next 10 or so years of your career is really important. And so being in an environment where you can learn a discipline, you can basically learn a trade, is really, really important. I think early on in my career, someone said, well, if you go client side first, you'll get depth in a category, and then you can go agency side and get breadth across that category, which is kind of the consulting model. If you think about the way, Deloitte or PwC or what work, they have industry specialism, which allows their organizations to go broad, and they either hire direct grads to kind of learn that, or they hire people out of industry that have depth of experience in that industry. Whereas I did it the other way around. I went agency side, and now I'm kind of operating in a client side environment. So I've gone breadth first over a practice, and then I've gone into that practice in depth within client side. So, but I feel like depth in a discipline is has been really valuable for me, and then growing that out into depth across other kind of practices has been really valuable. And I think, depth in discipline is great, but don't forget that you need also breadth across practices. I see plenty of very senior people in agencies who are incredibly good at what they do in that practice, but are massively ignorant about other disciplines around the table.
Yeah, this is like what we talked about, right? Is this the similar, like the creative and knowing about the the digital component? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, Like you can be leader of a brand agency, but you'll benefit massively from understanding what goes on in media and what the difference is between good media planning and bad media planning, and how that can help you as a brand creative agency leader, whatever the practice is, demonstrate effectiveness and demonstrate impact on the client's commercial bottom line. If you don't have that understanding, you're not going to be able to do that. So you're going to be missing an opportunity. If you don't understand, if you're a brand leader and you don't understand digital, then you're going to miss opportunities to create amazing customer experiences for your client. It may not be quite as relevant now, but certainly if you wind the clock back even 5 years, it was the case. And then I think in terms of collaboration, it means you just can't collaborate in the right way. So, every agency, every business is there to drive value to their customers. That's the only reason customers pay for stuff, is that you're driving value for them. Whether you make watches or you do B2B marketing or you produce creative, you've got to deliver value to your customers. And my belief is that cross-training allows you to be more nuanced and be more kind of fully across the opportunities that your business can use to deliver value to your customers. And so that means more revenue into the future. It means it's harder to swap out from your business into a competitive business, those kinds of things. And so if you think about strategically leading the agency, I think that breadth is really important in terms of mapping out areas, good areas of adjacency that you can go, kind of build your business into. I've seen lots of really like finger in the wind, pie in the sky kind of decisions about where agencies are going to go in terms of adjacent business areas. And a lot of them have failed, or they've really struggled for years because of this lack of understanding of other practices. So deep growth in a discipline is an advantage, but it's also can be a catch-22. I think variety is really valuable. And I think because you're always able to move on to another client or project, it keeps the job interesting. It keeps the job exciting. It means that there's always opportunity to kind of try something that's, tiny little bit beyond your capability and kind of grow your capability in the process. And it also means you get really great views of different categories in market and different marketing teams, which it feels to me like when I look at the job roles or job descriptions that recruiters put out for client-side roles, they just miss that aspect of being in an agency, which is, I've seen hundreds of marketing teams work. And so I know which ones are good and which ones I want to model from, and I know which ones are bad and that I'm going to avoid at all costs, right? I also know how to take lessons from FMCG and apply it to B2B, because people are people and there's a lot of transferable knowledge. But if I'd only worked, B2B tech in my career, then I would have a very, very small subset of examples I could draw from. But in my current role, drawing from this, as I said, hundreds of, maybe not quite hundreds, but maybe 100 clients over my career, I can really draw a lot of experience from a lot of that stuff, and that's really valuable.
Yeah, so I really like that. Yeah, I really like what you say over there, the breadth. I mean, we kind of see that the client side versus the agency side. It's like you said, it's lonely. And therefore, you don't have ways to kind of cross-check something, where a lot of our clients are like, what are other companies doing on this front? Like, okay, we're thinking of this. Can you tell me a little bit about other companies that are kind of tackling this? And you kind of realize there, it dawns on you that wow, like they don't have any visibility on this, where we kind of take it for granted, and we jump from this client to the other one, and so on and so forth. And that is definitely not the case on the client side. But no, really great point.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think agency is actually a really good place to start your career, but understanding what you're getting when you do it, and sort of what that means, that you have to look after you have to look after yourself and your career every day. So you need to understand what you're getting, but also what you're not getting, and what you need to kind of make sure the next 5 years, the next 10 years, the next 15 years is going to be, okay for you.
What are some of the red flags that people should look for in the agency space, right? So you talked about there are agency leaders that, you stay completely clear from, and then there are others that they're great leaders. Are there things that are red flags when you look at an agency? If you were thinking about working in an agency, right, there are red flags, and you're like, ooh, I'm not so sure if I want to work in that environment. What comes to mind?
So the first thing I'd say is, if you're starting your career, just get any job you can. Don't worry about filter. I mean, beyond like your physical safety, just don't bother about filtering too much. Just get the first job. Once you've got the first job, you're on your way, and you're going to have, even if you're only there 3 months, you're going to have just 1,000 times more experience than you have kind of entering into your career. The red flags, I mean, I think I've worked with great leaders, really, really, really seriously great leaders in the past, and I've had really great relationships with them, and I've worked with some other leaders that I haven't got on so well with. And, sometimes those two polar opposite kind of points can be the same person. Someone can, I can start work at an organization and it's going along, and in some cases it's gone along exceptionally well for years. But then slowly over time, priorities change and it turns. And so it's not about someone's innate personality or innate leadership quality. It's about, there's also a large component of it, which is about the context, I suppose, of the organization. I think it's really hard to evaluate an organization from the outside. I think you don't really know what you're getting until you've been in the seat 3 months. Generally, when I'm thinking about a role, I will use my network to try and connect with people and say, well, what's it like working there? I did that recently. I was approached about a CMO role, and I used my network to, evaluate whether I wanted to go for it or not. I kind of already had my gut instinct, but, my network basically said, no, you'll want to kill yourself after 6 months. So I didn't go for it. I think it's really hard. I do think, there's a few things that I look out for. I look out for mature leadership. I worked at Clemenger at a time where we had really, really senior leadership, and it felt like the ship was being steered by, a salty sea dog.
Salty sea dog.
Salty sea dog. Well, like an experienced ship captain that's seen all weathers and all that sort of stuff. And Clemenger at the time just felt like they knew exactly why they were doing everything they were doing. They knew how it all connected together, and they were a well-oiled machine. And there would be people who, may not agree with me, but that's how I felt at the time. And I felt really, really good about working in all. So senior leadership is really important. I think leadership that's open for conversation and discussion and doesn't bring too much of themselves to the table, actually. I think leadership's often about removing yourself from the table rather than it being all about you. If you have if you're speaking to a senior leader at an agency who wants to be a celebrity, it's probably not a great environment to work for. You need to have a leadership that's about building a solid and ongoing business, and building a culture that is, extremely productive and high quality, and delegates authority and those kinds of things. The bad leaders I've seen don't delegate authority. They hog the limelight. They bring all of the decisions to themselves. They put themselves in the center of the organization. And it just means that everyone's sort of stepping on eggshells all the time, and, not really sure at the start of the day what they're going to be doing at the end of the day, because everything's quite reactive. So those kinds of things would would be watch outs. I'd also sort of try and look, well, do I think the organization is successful? And you can sort of judge that. It's a surface level thing, but what do their offices look like? Well, does it look like it's taken care of and there's money flowing through the place? Or does it look like, is there an organization in a backyard garage with holes in the walls and whatever? And I think that the environment you give your teams and the respect with which you treat your future business is, sort of indicated by the quality of the surroundings.
I love it. So it sounds like your kind of recommendation and advice is for someone who's kind of getting into the space is to, or for someone young is to explore agency world. Is that a correct assumption or correct deduction from our conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I've found agency world to be very exciting and very exciting socially as much as professionally. And I thought the variety was great. I can't talk to building a career within the client side. I think there's benefits to that, but it sort of depends on what you want and depends on whether you're someone that's driven by that kind of culture and excitement and stuff, or whether you're someone who, I suppose is less driven by those things and more driven by working for a big business.
Got it. Okay. Tim, before we kind of wrap up, I wanna touch on a little bit of client side, right? And do a bit of pros and cons of, well, what are some of the things for people to keep in mind on the client side, right? So let's maybe start with the pros. What are some of those things on the client side that you think are important for people to take into consideration?
Yeah. Well, the first one would be ownership. You get to own the impact of the things that you're working on. That could be good or bad. If they're good impacts, awesome. If they're bad, not so good. But ownership as a professional, wanting to build a professional body of work and have my professional capabilities, kind of mean something at the end of the day. Ownership's really important to me. And so I see a lot more ownership possible on client side than agency side. I think I've been guilty of over-owning stuff on the agency side in the past. Yep, but certainly on the client side ownership. I think the other thing we mentioned before, we talked about horizons. The client side, I think, can just see a longer horizon. You can see what we're trying to do with the brand, what we're trying to do with sales, what we're trying to do with all sorts of different things, the marketing operating system, all that sort of stuff. And so I think that kind of horizon is a lot further out, and you can take delight in seeing yourself move towards that horizon. Whereas agency can become about, building boxes and shipping them a lot. And I think it gives you interestingly, client side offers an opportunity for cross-training a lot more than agency does. Because you'll have media conversations and you'll have digital conversations and you'll have all this sort of other stuff. But that kind of cross-training comes with a negative side, which is a lot of client-side marketers, I see, they can slip into being a project manager and be really great at understanding how to operate a marketing project, but then have to rely on their agency outsiders to make a lot of the big strategic decisions for whatever they're doing. And I think what that means is that they're missing an opportunity, A, to get really good themselves, and B, it means that having an outside party drive your strategy is not always bad, but it can be quite bad because it can sort of start to get quite fractured and distanced from what the organization's actually trying to achieve. So that's sort of a double-edged sword there. Cons would be, as I said before, nobody outside marketing understands marketing, or at least you have to assume that, right? So most people see marketing as comms. Most people see marketing as advertising, or as I like to say, sticking your logo on things. Most people in organizations with P&L responsibility are suspicious about what marketing is, what marketing does, and the impact that marketing has on their organization, because they're holding a purse strings and they're seeing marketing as a cost, not an investment. And I think you can turn that ship around. I've seen that ship turn around, but it takes time. And so because they see it as a cost, they don't necessarily care about it. Because they're not marketers, they're not interested in going to the depths of the nuance around brand equity and strategies around all that sort of stuff. They just want sales, and so even though you can kind of try and hold the tide back in some ways, you've got to let some of it through and focus on sales to build your brand equity within the organization so that you can kind of build a marketing team into the future. So it's kind of this kind of vacuum of professional kind of, what did I call it? Alliances, professional community is like it affects right through the marketing team if the culture's wrong. As I said, but when you have wins, they may not be attributed to marketing. They may be attributed to other things. So
ownership is great, but other people might not see you as the owner.
Yeah. So an example would be, in this role, I've increased the number of inbound leads by 76 times this year. Massive, massive, massive increase. But the jury is still out more broadly as to whether that's been marketing driven or not. Yeah, I think it has. That's my opinion.
Right.
So just because I've done a great job there doesn't mean that everyone thinks I've done a great job. So the other thing is when you have losses. So when you have wins, it's not necessarily about you. When you have losses, it's always about you. Right? You might say, well, it's because we tried to do this thing and we didn't have enough money, or we didn't have enough people, or we didn't produce a commercial outcome because of the funding that you guys gave us last year. It doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter when it's done. It's yep.
The history of what's gone on in the business prior to you getting there doesn't matter. It's all about here and now and what are you doing now. And so it can be brutal as well. Particularly if I was brought in to Versent to, in some ways, reshape marketing, deliver greater value through the marketing discipline within the organization. So I'm on a transformation journey of my own with them to get from a point where marketing wasn't doing much and was the petty cash tin of the organization to a point where marketing is really a force for commercial growth. But on that journey, it's like William Gibson, the future's here, it's just not evenly distributed, right? The future's here. We're doing some great stuff, but we're just not seeing the results quite yet, or people aren't seeing the results quite yet. They're there in front of them, but they're not understanding them yet. So it's a journey of transformation.
Got it. That's such a great list of things to take into consideration. And I think the ownership is obviously quite big. The horizon is quite an interesting component, but then there is the lonely component, and then there is the blames that you get. Some of the advantages can turn into cons and disadvantages in the agency in the client side. No, this is
it's a double-edged sword, and agency versus client side. There's no easy role. They all have their challenges, and they both have their opportunities. So I think building a career in marketing is really about, first of all, getting started, and then, listening to the right people and getting the right level of, kind of education under your belt, whether that's driven by practical experience or driven by kind of theoretical learning.
Got it. Tim, this has been a pretty awesome conversation. Before we wrap up, I want to ask a couple of rapid fire questions, okay? We'll do this really quick. So the first thing I want to ask you is what is one resource that has fundamentally changed the way you work or you live, or had a profound impact on you? What comes to mind? It could be a book, a blog, a podcast, a talk, whatever it is.
Okay, well, because we're talking career, I'm going to give you a few. So starting out, 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing by Rees and Trout.
Oh, that's
an old book.
Yes.
But it's great. Secondly, Truth, Lies and Advertising by John Steele. Mid-career, get an MBA at a good school. And by good school, I mean Melbourne Business School or Graduate School of Management in Sydney. Don't worry about how much it costs, because the government pays and then you take it back when you earn a lot. Or do a mini MBA with Mark Ritson. I did Mark Ritson's brand management course in my MBA, thankfully. And he distilled marketing into simple terms that in a way that no one I've ever seen or read has
his content is great.
He's very controversial in media, but he's actually the way he thinks about things is incredibly distilled and very, very powerful. And then the third thing mid-career I'd say is a book called Data Smart. It's again a little bit old, probably reflecting my career, but it's basically a combination of decision sciences and data science connected with basically a kind of a training manual on computer programming. So it's practical ways of analyzing data sets with the tools, education in the tools, and the education about what the analysis is saying. And it's amazing. It was a real pivot point for me in terms of my data capabilities. And then late career network, that's the best network. That's the best resource you could have.
Got it. Who you know. All right. Sounds good. Question number 2. If you could give one piece of advice to B2B marketers, what would it be?
People are people. There is no playbook. Don't get distracted by the tactics and forget what the strategy is. B2B marketers are often very distracted by the tactical execution of different types of things, lead magnets, whatever. Don't be distracted by that. You still need to think about the strategy, how you're communicating to people, and how you're trying to bring them into your world, how you're helping more people understand that your organization is delivering value and kind of enhancing the perception of that value over time. The second thing to contradict that is that playbooks can be helpful. I really like Andy Raskin's strategic narrative, and I really like a book called The Challenger Sale. And I think those two things go together very, very well in B2B.
Love it. Super actionable. Thanks for that. Question number 3. Who are some of the influencers? I mean, we've already kind of mentioned a few. Is there anybody else comes to mind in terms of influencers that you follow in this space?
Nothing earth-shattering. Bennett and Field, Byron Sharp. Make sure you get across the work that they're doing because it's transforming marketing and it's making it much easier to kind of connect marketing into commercial drivers of business. I just follow innovators because I think innovators are really interesting to follow. I think what Musk's been doing lately is just mind-blowing, not in terms of the businesses he's kind of investing in, but in the way he's handling media. And what the hell was that Twitter thing, and how he's stoking the fire of Dogecoin or Dogecoin or whatever it's called. It's like he's a really, really interesting operator, I think, at that level, at that sort of meta level. I think there's a guy, Johnny Harris, on YouTube that I watch a lot. He does very, very interesting investigative journalism, and he's an amazing storyteller. And so I sort of take a lot of learnings from that. Locally, I wanted to give a shout out to some people. I think Troy Muir, who is currently the global director of digital at Movember, does an amazing job at filling my LinkedIn feed with interesting stuff to think about. As does Juan Mendoza, who runs the MarTech Weekly, and you'll often see me in the comments kind of throwing stuff around with those guys.
Awesome. I'm just taking notes to get jotting these down. All right. Last question is, I know you've been in B2C and direct to consumer. Mm-hmm. But now you're in the B2B world, in the Versent land. And I know one of the core beliefs that you have is that, hey, people are people and there's not a lot of difference. But for those areas that there is a little bit of a difference, what's something that excites you about B2B today?
I'd say differences are surface level. And I think if you're properly cross-trained, you're going to be able to see more similarities than differences. However, I think the most exciting thing about B2B at the moment is that people like Bennett and Field and Byron Sharp are putting some effort into understanding the B2B world, and actually their data is showing that B2B is in some ways more similar to B2C than we could ever have imagined, and that emotion is more important in B2B than B2C, for example. So I think for me, being in B2B is really exciting today because we have this kind of growing set of data around what good B2B marketing is and what things like creativity mean to really strong B2B marketing. So things like being different, being exciting, being remembered, I think that's really interesting. One of the things I think about a lot of B2B categories, not all of them, but some of them, is that they're just high interest categories. It's very, very similar to buying a car. When you buy a car, you have, an interrelationship between the person who does the purchase and their partner or their kids, or how they're going to use the car or whatever it is, and it's a complex purchase that happens over a long period of time. B2B marketing's the same. Stakeholders are different, tensions are different within the stakeholder communities. But, I think the most exciting thing about B2B is that I hope in the next few years it becomes a lot more creative and, a lot more commercially accountable at the same time.
Cheers to creativity in B2B. That's awesome. Tim, this has been an awesome conversation. I really enjoyed our chat, and I think you shed some light on some great differences and similarities in the agency world and on the client side. I took a bunch of notes about the some of the people that you recommend that I'm going to check out now, so I'm super excited about that. But thanks for coming on the podcast, man. Really appreciate it.
No worries. Great to be here.
This episode of Growth Colony was produced by Alexander Hipwell. It was edited by Dave Samito, with additional editing and music arrangement also by Alexander Hipwell. Special thanks to Tina Wabe and Rod Hoda. We couldn't make this show without you. The show is hosted by Shahin Hoda. If you enjoyed the episode, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. And maybe even share the pod with a friend if you loved it that much. Thanks again for all the support, and looking forward to seeing you again in the next one.